in fact, this is where I agree with Tomasz here. There's still a lot more that can be done there. But you have to think about these also as prerequisites before you can even think about a peace agreement. Now, do you need a treaty? Well, color me skeptical. Putin doesn't want one, and he wants Ukraine. We'll probably say we'll get a cessation of hostilities. We do not want anything like another Budapest memorandum. That was a spectacular failure for which President Clinton has apologized. There must, however, be no recognition of Russia's illegal occupation of Ukraine or Ukrainian territory. We need to continue the 1940 Wells Doctrine regarding the Baltic states and apply that to Ukraine. We need to continue the Pompeo Crimea Declaration of 2018, also recognizing the same principle. Congress should pass the Crimea Annexation Non-Recognition Act that was introduced last year in the Congress. But so what about security guarantees? Well, obviously it has to do with establishing deterrence. And of course, boots on the ground are the sort of main ways you think about these things. But Ukraine is an enormous country, as we all know, and boots on the ground means a very, very large number. Ukraine has a large army itself, so can establish, that or can continue that factor for itself. But it also needs help from outside. And NATO member states and other countries in this coalition of the willing need to take risks. If Russia is the existential threat to Europe that their leaders say it is, and I agree it is, European leaders have to treat it as such, which means they have to make the economic trade-offs, the economic commitments, as well as take the political risks and commit the resources to establish that deterrence, so it doesn't break down and this whole thing breaks out again. Now, I'm not necessarily persuaded that the idea is being floated between Russia and the United States on economic deals that would help establish this sort of post-war or post-conflict status quo are necessarily the answer. The Handel durch Handel concept that we saw over the course of many decades actually contained as a Wandel durch Verflechtung, which means this sort of this German idea of change through interaction, economic interaction. Which sort of underpins this economic factor that the Russians and the Trump administration are talking about. I'm not sure that is necessarily an answer either. It might be a factor, but not the answer. So boots on the ground are really kind of going to be the major, as well as the other factors to deterrence, which means the anti-drone capabilities and the deep strike capabilities, et cetera, which are coming online. So I would say that the United States, that the Trump administration is more likely to do more on this issue the more it sees that Europe is prepared to do. The more commitment Europe displays towards this, the more the Trump administration is going to say, okay, they're serious, we're going to help them. Now, but we probably expect hybrid war to continue even during this absence of hostilities in ways, and we have to be prepared for this. EU membership would help, but that's a long way away, especially with 42.7. That's a long way. So color me a little bit more, I'd like to be hopeful, but a lot of things need to happen before we can start talking about this in a serious way. And in the European major sort of countries of the coalition, the willing, you have a relatively small number that are pretty robust about this, a lot of that are sort of sitting on the fence, and some that are not at all that enthusiastic about it, and we all know which countries those are. There are lots of domestic factors in each of the European and the NATO member states that are contributing to their lack of great enthusiasm for this. We have to be realists about what that entails. The elections coming up this fall in Germany in September, France in 2027. You've got Poland coming up, of course, and you've got any number of other things that will cause the leaderships of European member states to be maybe to start calibrating or triangulating or whatever, not necessarily going all in on this. And so this is another factor that Putin will exploit ruthlessly, and we have to try to be very aware of it and to work against it, because it's of utmost importance that there be a strong coalition of the willing, because that's the only thing that will prevent any kind of conflict, when it stops, from restarting again in 2 or 3 or 5 or whatever number of years. Maybe I'll stop now. Thank you.
Great. Thank you very much. Thanks to all of you for contributing your perspectives and view on the subject. I had one question for the panel at large, or interwoven question, and then I'd like to open it to the floor. My question is, it's a coalition of willing democracies. Democracies experience political change. Our times are marked by exactly that change. What kind of guarantees can be sustained when political change takes you in directions that may weaken the interest in supporting a peace agreement through security guarantees? So perhaps I can start with you, Viktorija, and we'll work down the row.
Thank you. Thank you. That's a very good and a very important question, in fact. I think the beauty of democracy is that we've got that ability to decide who we would like to have in government, and it happens in cycles, can be every 4 years, can be every 5 years. And in order to ensure that we are able to successfully compete with our adversaries, including Russia and China, in this regard, one of the ways how we can build that national consensus around what are our national security priorities, defense priorities, and foreign policy priorities, including our ongoing support for Ukraine, is to ensure that we all are on the same page, and that we've got the whole of society approach, where the society as a whole and also our political leaders understand the importance of long-term thinking when it comes to these issues. And we can't be in a situation where if the government changes, then for some reason we move from one side to the other 180 degrees and change our way or approach how we deal with the biggest war on the European continent since 1945. So I think the answer is to ensure that we continue to build that cross-party consensus in all our democracies, and we maintain that strategy of supporting Ukraine and understanding that Ukraine's security is our security.
Well, it's a question of the format. I think we must take in consideration and listen very carefully to what happened in Copenhagen a few hours ago, when the former Secretary General of NATO, Anders Rasmussen, spoke about a new alliance. He called this the D7, Alliance of Democracies, like-minded countries. And that brings the question of what type of countries should commit to protect or to guarantee or to ensure the security guarantees of Europe. The Ramstein Group is 50 countries. The security of Ukraine, sorry. The Ramstein Group is 50 countries. The Coalition of the Willing gathered 35 countries in Paris in September. 26, decided that they were ready to commit or having this capability, availability. So the question of the format is very important, and of course it goes way beyond Europe, as now we are calling for a new organization or new countries, like-minded countries, to gather or to be on the same track. Canada, New Zealand, Australia, and of course not to forget the non-EU members who are on the same track as we are, but are still members of NATO. I have in mind, of course, Norway. I think this brings us to reflect on a new perspective, to have, like the former Prime Minister of France, Michel Barnier, mentioned a few weeks ago, a European Security Defence Council, something that we can use to decide more broadly without having the Damocles sword of the veto in the European Union, or the decision-making process, which is hampered by a certain number of countries who are willing to put their veto. Of course, we are in a post-Orban era, but we still have a certain number of countries. I'm not focusing specially on a certain number of leaders who can put pressure on the decision-making, and either we have a new European treaty, either we decide to have the decision made, besides on a wider perspective. I do believe the EPC can be very useful for having a more geopolitical European or wider Europe, 47 countries, to join in and to commit. And of course, this is about also readiness 2030. We must commit on the long term, but we must also be prepared to commit now. And the problem is that we took too much time to decide, so now there is an urgency to create new organization, a new mindset of decision making or willingness of having this decision, and I think this is what we must do at the European level, but not only at the European level. So this Islands of Democracy, old idea, George Bush had this idea to gather 81 democracies, but of course Donald Trump may not be considering the same countries as democracy, or defining them as democracies.
Thank you. So, there's always like half full, half empty dilemma, but I'm rather like in the optimistic team. So I'd like to indicate the huge progress we already made in Europe when it comes to identifying our interest in Ukraine and our position towards Russia. So we agreed during in the Madrid NATO strategy concept that Russia is major security threat for Europe. Something which was unbelievable, because before Madrid we had discussion if we should call it Russia adversary, competitor, or whatever, but there we agreed that Russia is major threat. If you take a look on any strategic concept of any European country right now, everybody emphasized that Russia is #1 threat. I believe France presented the your strategic review last year in June, and actually according to your review, Russia is major threat for Europe, and we should be prepared. Actually, I mean France for the full-fledged war in Europe in the next couple of years. So there is a level we are. Germany changed their constitution actually to be able to spend more on defense. So actually they are on the clear path to spend 5% of GDP for security according to the Hague Summit. Something again absolutely unbelievable, couple of years ago. So if somebody told me that, I don't know, 5 years ago, I would say that he's absolutely crazy. But we are in this point right now. Of course, there might be some political shifts, as we had, I don't know, right now in Bulgaria or something. But I think that majority voice of the mainstream European, it's that our interests are in Ukraine. Russia is fighting war not against Ukraine, not to, I don't know, conquer Donbass or even Ukraine as a whole, but it is fighting against, all rule-based order to undermine security order in Europe, and our interests are there to stop Russians, for these efforts. Full stop.
I've got one, thank you. I think one of the main thing here really is leadership, because we've seen a lot of good, really very, very, very important steps that have been taken in the last several years on the European side, which is very welcome. But our democracies, while they're a strength, they're also a weakness, because there's this inherent tension between social programs and defense. And most politicians give too much attention to the social aspect, or have been for the last 30-some years, and having a hard time sort of switching completely. And the populations are grouchy. They'd rather have more social programs and less defense. They're acceding to more, or acquiescing to more defense because they recognize that this is a different situation. But it's still not going far enough, nearly far enough. militaries are still in terms of sizes are still too small. The capabilities are still far too small, and so we need to see politicians, the leaders in the alliance, take a much more public stance and actually, in fact, weather some domestic criticism and actually lead and demonstrate to the populations that this is in fact the existential threat that some are saying, because these there are still I mean, that's one of the many sort of dirty little secrets out there is that there are so many activities that are in Europe that are still financing the Russian war machine 4 years later, that we sort of still wonder sometimes to what extent they're really all in on this. So leadership is absolutely critical, which in democracies is a tough thing, and not every leader is prepared to weather the storms and the turbulence that might that may result when exercising that leadership that is, I think, so necessary.
Great, thank you very much. Now it's the time to open up to the audience. I've got one question over here. Roving mics. Here we are. Again, if you identify yourself before asking.
James Everard, a previous DSAC, and I'm interested because, yes, we needed to demonstrate to President Trump that Europe was stepping up, and this led to the coalition of the willing, so it's a political initiative. But if you look at it practically as a force generator, I don't care what rule you apply, but it ends up absorbing the bulk of NATO's high readiness forces to deliver this, and therefore undermines the ability of the alliance to deliver the plans that our leaders agreed to deliver at Vilnius. And I just wondered whether you felt there had been a good enough debate on the downside, on the detrimental consequences of trying to deliver this coalition of the willing, as opposed to trying to find a better way.
Does anyone want to take that question, or all of you want to take that? Stunned silence. No, not good. You're on a panel.
I mean, I think you've actually identified, you put your finger on it, Sir James. I mean, it's a very, it's a limited pie, and when you're adding to some, you're taking away from others, and you're growing the pie at the same time, but it's still not, the pie is still not big enough. So until the leaders demonstrate that to their populations, that the pie has to grow even more, and that the coalition, whatever assets go to the coalition, can't sort of that the assets assigned to the mission, to the NATO missions, remain what they are, while addressing that other coalition of the willing factor. That's serious money and serious commitment, and are we seeing it in the statements and the campaigns of the leaders? I'm not really sure.
Thank you very much, General. As always, excellent questions. I think there are probably two things here. So the first one, we probably still lack an agreement on how that force will look like and what's going to be the length of deployment. And then the second question probably also relates to what can we realistically commit to, given what you've just explained. And I don't think we've had a proper discussion on that. But the way how I would look at it is, we know that the biggest threat to European security is Russia. I mean, every country has explicitly stated that. And we do need to allocate sufficient resources within what we possibly can do at this given time to ensure that at the very front line we are able to properly deter Russia and not to embolden it even more, because that will then have that secondary effect that with them being emboldened and threatening our security in the middle of Europe, also Western Europe. So I would look at it that way.
Maybe one additional comment about the security guarantees and the coalition of the willing. From a French perspective, of course, I'm not speaking in the capacity of a French official. Putting boots on the ground comes after there is peace, and maybe not in a very symmetrical capacity. We are speaking about trainers, we are speaking about sort of non-intervention force capacities, or having specialists from cyber, or maybe demining specialists and so forth and so on. So we're not speaking about hard military capacity, but smoother, softer capacity in order to allow Ukraine to rebuild its defense technological capacity. It is strong when it comes to drones. So maybe in a nutshell, I think we're not speaking about the same thing, at least in Paris, in other capitals, when we're speaking about security guarantees. For us, security guarantees is allowing Ukraine to assume its security and not do it for or on behalf of a NATO mandate, which does not exist, or a United Nations mandate, which Russia does not want. So I think there's a blur situation here. We're not giving and putting the same words in the security guarantees that France and other countries are willing to commit. And of course, last point, security guarantees is not speaking only about Ukraine. It's a methodology, or having a coalition of the willing for other crises. We see that with the Strait of Hormuz, when the Prime Minister of Great Britain, Prime Minister of Italy, Prime Minister Prime Minister of Giorgia Meloni, and a German Chancellor mentioned the fact that we have to have the same willingness to reopen the Strait of Hormuz once the peace is agreed. Same thing with Ukraine.
And yeah, last point from my side.
Only a few minutes left. So
Just shortly, so you know, in regards of shortages of capabilities, it basically shows us where we are as European. As far as I remember, you know, during the Cold War, you as a Brits, within the framework of Army of Ren, you deployed to Germany at least two heavy divisions. Yeah. Right now, I'm not sure if, as a whole, Europe will be able to send one single division to Ukraine. So it's another evidence that, first of all, we need to do our job and increase our efforts, you know, here in Europe.
There's time for one more very brief, I think we'll give yes and no answers to it, but anyway, yeah.
Thank you. Carsten Friis from the Norwegian Institute of International Affairs. Just very briefly, first on your question from the chair. I mean, the best way to secure against changing political governments is, of course, having a treaty. And that's why Ukraine, one of the reasons Ukraine wants to go into NATO is they want to have a treaty base, because then it's legally binding. But my comment is more general. I struggle a little bit. I agree with those on the panel who say that this is a peace treaty in Ukraine is unlikely. So maybe the best we can hope for is some kind of a frozen conflict. It's frozen because Ukraine freezes Russian capacity to attack them. And if that is the peace we're having, the point one, will we Europeans be willing to engage to deploy troops there? And secondly, do we need to? Because Ukraine already have managed to stabilize the situation. So I feel sometimes this discussion is a little bit like old-fashioned. We think, all right, peacekeepers in the traditional way, but I think actually what we will see is that we have a strong, if this goes well, we will have a strong Ukraine, supported like now with industry and niche capacities, not some deployment as many people seem to think of. Thank you.
Thank you. Not sure. I think that, unless you want to comment, I want to leave us with one more question to the panel, one more observation, and draw that, which is, I'd like that we would have spoken about the coalition of the willing and its meaning for the Black Sea. We're at a conference on the Black Sea. What does this mean in terms of the actual, this theater of operation, as it were, and the likes? And I know we've been inferred and discussed this about Ukraine, but I think that we can look at the broader context of the Black Sea and what that means. But I'm going to just leave that as a final comment rather than explore it with our panel, who have been very generous with their time and thoughts on these subjects. So thank you. Let's all thank the panel.